Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Kingdom of Dreams podcast, The Making of Stories. I'm your host, Jawad Mir. Today, we're going to be reviewing the film Saturday Night, directed by Jason Reitman, based on the 90 minutes that led to the premiere episode of Saturday Night Live. My guest today is James Mottram. He's an author, a critic who I've had on this podcast many, many times, and we deep dive into the film, into the direction, into the way of filming, and we kind of agreed on some points and disagreed on others. So without further ado, here's my conversation with James Mottram reviewing Saturday Night. Thank you so much for joining, man. I appreciate it. We're here to talk about Saturday Night, the film by Ivan Reitman, and I saw it at TIFF.
Jason Reitman.
Jason Reitman, sorry. Of course. Thank you for the correction. I saw it at TIFF, but you just saw it recently, but love to hear your initial reaction of what you saw.
Yeah, I kind of I hadn't read a lot about it. I knew obviously it was about shooting the very first ever episode of Saturday Night. I call it Saturday Night Live, by the way. Is it not called that in the States? Is it just known as Saturday Night?
No, it's called Saturday Night Live here, but I think the film is called Saturday Night, correct?
It is, and in the film they refer to this, you know, the show they're putting on for the first time, the first ever episode, purely as Saturday Night, not Saturday Night Live. So I guess that it's never really explained in the film, because I would assume the title Saturday Night Live came later. But yeah, or maybe in America they just call it Saturday Night. Even now, I'm not sure. But I've always known
No,
it as Saturday Night. It was SNL. That's what it's known
no, no,
as.
no. It's in Canada and US. It's called SNL. My only guess is either what you just said, that it's true that it was called SNL afterwards, so they wanted to be true to that. Other aspect could be maybe they didn't get permission from the producers of SNL, so they, instead of calling it SNL, they just called it Saturday Night, just so that to avoid any kind of legal. I don't know. I'm just guessing on that, but uh, but yeah, it is called SNL here for as long as I've known it, for at least 30, 35 years.
Yeah. So that's about as much as I knew about the film going into it, that it was just about this first ever episode that they kind of put together. And I'd seen a few posters around which are quite nicely done, sort of, talking about the chaos that ensues. And I think chaos is a word that really sums up the film for good and bad, because it is an entirely chaotic first episode. John Belushi hasn't signed his contract, for example. They make a big thing about that. There's a lighting rig that falls down at one point, almost squashing Belushi actually and his co-star. There's sort of the unions are kind of sitting on their asses, not doing anything. Not sort of doing the heavy lifting. There's the whole thing about the fact that it might not even go out, the episode, that they might rerun an old Johnny Carson episode, and it's all down to this kind of contract dispute that's happening in the background with Carson. So it's a kind of great backdrop for the film, I think. I don't my sort of wondering, my concern is obviously SNL is huge in the States, and I guess in Canada too. Um, in the UK, less so, and I would imagine Europe as well. So I'm curious to see how it will play, in Europe. Will anyone really care? Because SNL is such an American institution. Are people that concerned about it over here? That said, you do have people like obviously Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd, who are very well known as kind of Hollywood comedy stars of the 80s, who got their start on that very first episode. Um, so I think there will be some recognition factor, you know, outside of the States. But I think you have to look at it as a kind of great behind the scenes uh, movie. Often we get behind the scenes, films within films, films about filmmaking. We don't often
Yeah.
get films about TV making, or live TV making, let's call it. Although strangely, there is, albeit on a very different subject, actually only about 3 years apart in chronology, but September 5, I don't know if you've caught that yet, but that's
I
about
yeah, I was just
live
gonna talk
TV.
about
Yeah,
that. Yeah,
we
yeah.
can bring that up in a minute, but that's obviously about a different side of live TV, but connected to the terror attacks in the Munich Olympics in 1972. So it's interesting that that film in the UK at least is coming out on February the 6th. So, a week after Saturday Night, and both of them capture the kind of absolute chaos, as I mentioned that word earlier, the chaos of live TV. And I think when Saturday Night starts, and you really do, Reitman does convey this, insanity of kind of the cameras weaving in and out. There's characters kind of moving in and out of the studio. It's almost hard to concentrate to begin with. I think it does calm down a little bit later on as you begin to discover who the characters are. I mean, it's driven by the producer of the show, Lorne Michaels, and he's quite a young chap who's collected all these comedic talents, these kind of anarchic comedic talents like Chevy Chase, like Dan Aykroyd, like John Belushi. He's found them all, in various improvisational sort of on stage improv troops in Chicago and so forth. And he's collected them all for this sort of huge NBC show on national TV, which is game changing, really. So I think it does convey that element, the kind of risks that were happening at that moment. That doesn't make it an easy film always to watch and possibly to enjoy. I think because it is quite chaotic to watch, as well as perhaps because it is conveying this chaos that is happening in the studio. How true all that is, I really would love to know. I mean, did a lighting rig fall down and almost squash John Belushi, for example? I don't know. Did he leave the studio in his bee costume and go ice skating, which is what we see at one point in the film? I don't know, but it kind of makes for good drama, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I honestly didn't again, TIFF was like I went into TIFF as we talked last time about Flow, just knowing about a couple of films I wanted to watch because I just wanted to go on the fly and just sort of figure out things. And a lot of that happened as Saturday night kind of came up in the program, like, oh, Saturday night is going to show. So I got the ticket, I went, and maybe because it's the director in me and the producer in me, I really liked the behind the scene chaos because I've never done anything SNL, like in terms of live, but even like a production itself, there's always chaos, like whether it's small, medium, or large. And but to add the live element to it, I thought that was very, very, well done. Especially for me personally, what really made it engaging was the way the camera kept following from hallways to stairways to outside and this one world that they created. And to me, whether it was accurate or not, it really sucked me in. And even if there was no SNL and it was just like a fiction story, I was really involved in the characters and their struggles and their contracts and ups and downs. So full-fledged, and I think for that purpose, it might work in UK and Europe, even if you take the SNL thing out completely because it's a form of entertainment as to what goes on. But now, whether people are fascinated by behind the scene or not, I don't know. It is for me because I'm in the behind the scenes world. But going to what you were saying, September 5th, which I haven't seen, but I know exactly what it's about. It's a similar thing, but a completely different tone, right? Something way more serious and dramatic.
Yeah, yeah, very, very much so. I mean, but they both convey, I suppose, the high wire nature of live television. And although ironically we don't in Saturday Night, we don't really see how the show itself unfolds because this is a real time film set in the hour and a half leading up to the
Mm-hmm.
broadcast of that first episode. So, one would almost have to assume that the actual broadcast, obviously some of it is pre-recorded sketches, I think, that they've done, but some of it is because they're editing them through, in this hour and a half leading up to it, and then some are going to be live. But one would assume that it all went swimmingly because we never actually see if anything goes wrong during that actual broadcast of the show. It's all about the chaos leading up to it and getting on air in the first place, which, obviously, as we know, that happened. Um, but I liked it as an idea. I mean, what I really liked, I think, was generally speaking, the cast. I think some of them I recognize. Well, you'll certainly recognize Willem Dafoe, who
Mm-hmm.
plays one of the kind of NBC executives who kind of has the big say so over whether it goes on air or not. But then there were a lot of people I didn't recognize so much. I mean, it took me a while to figure out the British actor Matthew Rhys, who
Mm.
plays George Carlin, one of the more volatile comedians, that we see in there. Um, and then who else have we got? I mean, there's Corey Michael Smith, who plays Chevy Chase. I thought he was great. I thought he really captured Chase's sort of slight smarminess, you could call it. Um, Now, an actor I'm not familiar with, but the guy who's cast as Lorne Michaels, Gabriel LaBelle, he was great. I thought, no, he really does live and die by his performance because he is the sort of the guide through this chaos. Who else have we got? I mean, there's Rachel Sennett, who is kind of sort of reasonably well known as kind of Lorne Michaels' kind of colleague Rosie. Yeah, it's just a bunch of really interesting performers. Matt Wood as Belushi. Yeah, so again, I don't know how well known some of these people are in the States, but I don't think they're particularly well known over here. But they're all really authentic. I thought it was a really authentically feeling cast, and that was one of the things I really enjoyed. That did as much as the sort of costumes and the sets, mid 70s kind of feel, it was really their performances that kind of grabbed me and made me go, yeah, I can believe that this is a troupe of young, up and coming comedians who we know some of them are going to be super famous in 10 years' time or even less than 10 years' time. But yeah, I know. So I kind of really bought it from that point of view, and that's why I found it an enjoyable enough film because it was really well performed. It was a good ensemble performance or series of performances.
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing with Jason Reitman. I mean, his films like Up in the Air with George Clooney that came out. I'm guessing it was been now 15, 20 years, and he did Juno, I think, and I think he also did the most recent Ghostbusters, or he produced it.
Yeah,
But he has this ability, which I find not many directors have, and he has that same ability that Chris Columbus had with films like Mrs. Doubtfire, Home Alone, Spielberg has. He's really able to write the characters really, really well. And then when the actors who are really good at what they do, they take that and then they take it to another level. And that really works with this film as well. And for me, the most impressive part was, now this was the editor in me for looking at it, because whenever it was like, the countdown, 20 minutes in or whatever the time was, and the way it was, especially towards the end, the last act, the way the time and the way the flow of the film was going, it was very much in accordance to the time that they were showing. And that, I don't know if that, do you know what I'm saying about what I mean by that in terms
yeah,
of,
kind of. I'm slightly nitpicky about that time thing because, as you said, like the first caption I think we see is 10 o'clock, 10 p.m., and then it clicks into 10:01, 10:01, and then the film is I think about an hour 45 minutes, something like that, and yet it goes from 10 p.m. to 11:30. Now this is me being really pedantic, but I kind of think the film should have run to 90 minutes to completely convey that 90-minute hysteria. But that's just me being picky,
no,
basically.
no, you're right. And I think that did happen in the last part, like the last 10, 15 minutes of the film. But yes, you were right. It should have been, or at least they should have started at 9:45.
Well,
All they
yeah,
had to do,
exactly. At 9:45.
right,
What difference would that have made? Yeah,
just flip the time, and that's a much easier thing to do, right? So,
yeah.
but yeah,
But it is
no,
it is close to being a real time movie as much as you can make these things real time, and it did convey that kind of urgency of oh my god, like there's the funny bit where they've got this pinboard, corkboard with all the little different cards that are going to represent all the sketches and songs and all the various bits and pieces that are making up the show, and he and Lorne Michaels still hasn't decided what's going in the show. So it's going to run to about 3 hours if they did all of those sketches, and we know that's not going to happen, of course. So you kind of get the sense of how absolutely wild the show was then. People keep asking him, "What is this show?" And he doesn't really have an answer to that, at least until the end, which we won't reveal, of course. And that's a very nice speech that Gabriel has. But yeah, in a way, it sums up the kind of anarchic nature of the show that no one really knew what it was or what the tone was going to be, but it was going to be completely out there. And of course, it did ultimately launch an incredible amount of comedians, not just in that initial series, but repeatedly the new generations again and again. I mean, it's funny because as someone from the UK, you often hear about SNL, and of course, many of the famous comedians that came out of it, but you don't often see a lot of it. I mean, we had our own version in the 1980s. There was a Friday Night Live, basically, with kind of,
Oh, was it?
yeah, with alternative, with comedians that were kind of as influential in their own way as some of the guys that we've just been talking about, who did a lot of, what they called alternative comedy in the 80s in the UK. So they basically ripped off, the SNL format, and it lasted for a while, and but it never had the lasting impact that SNL did. So yeah, it definitely is a film that captures that, you know, this is the beginning of a generation moment, I think. But yeah, time with the timing, going back to the timing, um, yeah, it's hard to do a real time movie, I think. And I think he did a pretty good job. I mean, it's very different to, you mentioned a few of his movies that he's done before. As you said, Juno, he did The Front Runner, if you saw that one, the political drama with Hugh Jackman.
Hmm.
Yeah, I feel like it's a really different film for him. In terms of, yes, I suppose you could say, well, he works in the entertainment universe. It's not that, so it's not so far away from Reitman's, world that he understands. But purely as a piece of narrative and the way it was put together, as we were saying, this kind of, you know, the tension of this 90 minutes or a little over 90 minutes, that's hard to pull off. And I think he did a pretty good job in that sense.
Yeah. No, I enjoyed it. I liked it, and I think going back, one of the things you mentioned about Friday Night Live, the one that British humor, a little log a segue here, British humor that I kind of watched a lot. You must know this show, Mind Your Language.
Yeah,
Have
that's
you
from
ever?
the 70s, isn't it? I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, the
Yeah,
70s one, yeah. Which I mean, even to the day, like if you watch some of it, like it has it's still somewhat timely. Um, but the thing with SNL is it has long SNL is like even like I think I've gotten to more into SNL now again after kind of being away from it for a while. Now because of the movie because and the tone of the comedy is so different now than it was back then. Now it's very political natured, right? Like there's all these political and social and psychological elements. But back then in the 80s, it was so different, and it has launched pretty much even now, like for any comedian, the starting comedian, if he or she gets a bit at Saturday Night Live, it's like a huge achievement. So that's how big of a platform it is. It's like every comedian's dream. But
yeah, no, it really is. I mean, I don't know now whether it's considered as influential as it was then, but as you say, it's often these days it seems about who's hosting it as well, because they have all these different actors and celebrities hosting it, and that seems to be a massive thing. If you've hosted SNL, then you've kind of made it basically. Um, but yeah, I guess we won't really know about this generation and who's going to turn out to be, a huge Hollywood star until a few years' time. But yeah, I feel like it wasn't just the Chevy Chases and Dan Aykroyds that got their starting point. I mean, I think was Eddie Murphy on SNL at one point, and then maybe Jim Carrey as well. Although I think that might have been
yep,
in Living
Jerry
Color.
Seinfeld, Jim
Yeah,
Carrey, for sure, all of them. I'm just I think the Oscar nominations came out today.
they have. Yeah, I had a quick
Um,
glance.
I don't know if Saturday Night got nominated for anything.
I
Do
didn't
you-
I didn't see that it did, but our favorite animation Flow did though.
Of course.
Although if you look by I'm looking on the Academy's website, it says the nominees are to be determined for Flow, which I think is quite strange. So they haven't decided who yet will potentially get the Oscar. Presumably the writer director would, but outside of that, I'm not sure.
Well, if you go to IMDb, there's only one person who has done every single thing from directing to
Uh,
editing to
mm.
he's barely any credit. But speaking of the animation features, Flow, Inside Out to Wallace and Gromit, Wild Robot, Memoir of a Snail, which I still have to see. But yeah, I mean, other than
Well, these
I
were the
think
ones
that
we were talking about
we're
last time
talking
we
about
spoke.
it.
We pretty
Yeah,
much named that those five, I think, would get nominated. I think they are all front runners in different ways. So it's a great category this year in terms of animation, in terms of who would win it, because you could pick any of those five and they'd be worthy winners for sure. So
I think
um,
it's going to be a tight race between Flow and Memoir of a Snail. I haven't seen it, but I've heard from you and a lot of people because Inside 2, the sequel, Disney's Pixar, Wallace and Gromit is something not original, even though it is a great movie. Wild Robot, it's based on a book, but with Flow and Memoir of Snail, I think it's a different type of animation and it's not been done before. And good stories, at least for Flow, and I'm sure Memoirs of Snail, so we'll see. But
mm.
anything exciting you're watching next?
That is a good question. Well, I'm going to see on Monday again The Last Showgirl, the Pamela Anderson film, which
All right.
she didn't get a nomination, and she was definitely, I suppose, what you'd consider a snub, because she was definitely in the running, I think. Yeah, she's been beaten out by, well, I'm just looking at the actress. Well, all fairly solid performances. Cynthia Erivo, Carla Sofia Gascon from Emilia Perez, Mikey Madison, and Nora. That's possibly a bit of a surprise, although that film has done very well. Demi Moore, The Substance. I mean, she's got to be a front runner. And then, I mean, probably the big shock is Fernanda Torres from the Walter Salas Brazilian movie I'm Still Here, and she won the Golden Globe. So which is amazing that she's for a subtitled movie has got that far, but that's probably edged out poor Pamela. But yeah, so I think I'm seeing that next week. That's about it for the moment. What about you? Anything exciting on your roster?
I might be going to see Flight Risk, the Mel Gibson
Uh,
film.
is that the one with
Um,
Mark? Is that Mark Wahlberg as well?
yeah,
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 I
and
know
Toph.
very little about that film. I haven't seen it or read about it. Or
Well, I just saw the trailer and that's pretty much it, and that's all I know. Topher Grace, I think, is it? Topher Grace? Yeah, I think Topher Grace is in it. Mark Wahlberg and Mel Gibson. I mean, Mel Gibson so far to me has a 100% track record. It's kind of a different film for him, considering what he's done in the past, like Braveheart, The Passion
is
of
he
Christ.
directing Flight Risk?
Yeah,
Or
yeah, yeah,
oh wow,
yeah,
I didn't know that.
yeah.
Wow,
Yeah, and I think they shot most of it indoors, like with the LED screens and everything.
right.
But yeah, looking forward to that. So I might see that this weekend. But other than that, probably just gonna narrow down the Oscar list with like films like The Brutalist, Conclave, The Complete Unknown, and just check them out.
Are they
And
all out now where you are?
Yeah, they should be. They should
Hmm.
be. Yeah. I'm really. I'm actually. I didn't. The Brutalist. I didn't know much about until it won the Golden Globe, and then I saw the trailer. I'm like, oh, this is a great story. I think it's a very timely story. And A Complete Unknown is, James Mangold, and the story is quite kind of interesting of an underdog, and so we'll see. Well, we'll see. But looking forward to that. Maybe we can chat about one of those in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, I love The Brutalist. I'm a big fan of that. I've seen that twice because that was in Venice back in September. So yeah, you'll enjoy that. Make sure you give yourself plenty of time though. It's 3 hours and a half, including an intermission. So 15-minute
Okay.
intermission. So very old school. But yeah, I wouldn't schedule anything else on that day to give yourself time to absorb it. Um, and yeah, the Timothy Chalamet as Bob Dylan is very good as well. It's a very nice evocation of the era. And Mangold has been nominated for best direction on that movie as well. So although I kind of think it's a difficult shout, that category, because you've got Sean Baker for Anora, who won the best film in Cannes. Brutalist Brady Corbet won Best Director in Venice. Then you got Mangold, as I said. Then you got Emilia Perez, which has got the most nominations at the Academy Awards this year, with Jacques Audiard. And then The Substance, which has got its own fans as well. So it's a good race. It's a good race in that category.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'm excited. I'm excited. Looking forward to all that. So, let's do that again. And awesome. Looking forward to chatting more and keep me posted about all the other fun stuff that you're working on.
All right, man. Take care of
All
yourself.
right, take care.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.